My next guest is Dan Butler. Dan serves as a principal of Epworth Elementary School in the Western Dubuque Community School District. Previously, he was a principal of Epworth and Farley Elementary Schools simultaneously for 4 years, focusing on positive relationships with all members of the learning community in high impact instructional techniques, building leadership capacity in others, and establishing successful school cultures. Prior to serving as an administrator, Dan taught third and fifth grades in the Western Dubuque district, as well as serving as a baseball and football coach. In addition to his responsibilities as a building principal, Dan works as an adjunct professor in the Educational Leadership Department at the University of Northern Iowa, where he earned his doctorate degree. Dan has received numerous awards and was most recently recognized as a finalist for the School Administrators of Iowa Elementary Principal of the Year in 2019 and 2020. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Well, thanks for having me, Dana. I am greatly appreciative of the opportunity.
Well, as I start with everybody, I'd like to ask you about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Yeah, well, I think most recently has probably been this past school year, knowing that last year in March 16th or whatever it was, when we were told we were shut down and we were going to be shut down for 4 weeks at a time. And then it turned out to be for the remainder of the school year. And then the summer prior to the school year, thinking about how in the world are we going to open up schools safely amid a global pandemic and make things as normal as we possibly can for our students and for our teachers. And that was a really trying time, and is about as deep in the trenches as I've been as an educator, just putting those plans into place. But knowing that we had a great group of people to be able to do that. And we did do that. We were able to get out of the trenches and put plans into place and make things as typical as they possibly could be. And have a very successful school year amid all the challenges and the adversity that we faced.
And did you spend a lot of your year in a hybrid setting or mostly full in person at the elementary level? How was your school year kind of in that term?
That's a great question. So we called it a hybrid model. And what we did was we went to school 4 full days per week. So Monday through Thursday. And our teachers were tasked with the responsibility of teaching in-person students and the students that chose the virtual plan. So we kept Fridays as no school days for students. And then that day was used for teachers to prep virtual content for the next week for our virtual learners. We stayed in that model until mid-February when the governor and state of Iowa said, nope, everybody's coming back in person, face-to-face. And then at that point, we dismantled that model, came back 5 days full out per week. So yeah, the majority of the year was kind of in that 4-day per week model.
I'm sure you're looking forward to next school year starting, back to the regular 5 days a week, and just such a 180 from what we were thinking about last year and all the uncertainties throughout the summer.
Absolutely. Hopefully some type of normalcy will be established, and whatever normalcy is anymore, but hopefully back to more of that traditional model and opened up to the different activities and the different things that we're so accustomed to doing within school. So yeah, at this time this year, it's a lot less stressful than it was at this time last year as we were making plans and just so much uncertainty in the air.
And you're actually able to do some of the work that you've done in the summer as usual as a principal, and not constantly be inundated with, oh, what if this, what if that, and how are we going to do this, right?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about your book that was recently published called Permission to Be Great, and what people can learn from your book and kind of the journey to writing it, because this coincided with writing your dissertation as well.
Yeah, so recently released this book, Permission to Be Great, Increasing Engagement in Your School, and I worked with Connected Publishing with Jeff Zoll and Jimmy Casas on that project. And how this kind of came about, I recently defended my doctoral dissertation last August, and shortly after that time, I was approached by Connected Books and just if I had an interest in writing something, and
Mhm.
I did. So I came across a lot of research, obviously within my dissertation, and what I was looking at in my dissertation study was, do these positive psychology practices that districts put into place,
Mhm.
do they have an impact on teacher burnout or educator burnout? And is there a significant difference for those that employ these different positive psychology strategies with those that don't? And I found, yes, that it does make a difference.
Mhm.
So what I wanted to do within Permission to Be Great is make it more personalized and not so much academic writing that
Mhm.
most
Mhm.
people outside of academia are not going to read. I wanted to make it something that would be consumable for a practitioner, whether you're a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, an instructional coach, a paraprofessional, anyone working in the educational field. How could you take some of these ideas,
Mhm.
some of these concepts, and could it impact your practice?
Okay.
And I weaved in some fictional stories, some personal stories of struggle and success, and to take this research related to burnout and engagement and put it into something very consumable, very readable for a practitioner. And that was my
Mhm.
goal. And so far, the feedback has been very good that I've met that goal or accomplished that with the readers. So I'm really looking forward to more engagement around Permission to Be Great.
Mhm. And you talked about there's six mismatches between work and the work environment for both principals, teachers, and teacher leaders. So can you talk a little bit about those mismatches and how can maybe this also exists outside of education. So how can we maybe rise above some of those mismatches to, start off the next school year, in a better way? Like you're saying, this is all about teacher burnout. This is about positive psychology. So we don't want
You
to not have that burnout happen next year.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the bulk of my research that I collected within my dissertation work and
Mm-hmm.
within this book comes from Christina Masloch and Michael
Okay.
Leiter, who I would consider the godmother and the godfather of really workplace burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And through their work and with the work of their colleagues, they've identified 6 mismatches when this is out of place between the individual and the work environment. The greater the gap between those two, the
Mm-hmm.
greater the likelihood of burnout. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then conversely, the greater the match between the individual and the work environment, the greater the likelihood of engagement, which I
Okay.
consider, just like they do, engagement as the opposite end of the spectrum of burnout. It's on a continuum. Okay, so those areas are, first off, workload. All right, how much work do you have to do, and how much resource do you have to get that done? The resource could include time, it could include people, it could include physical materials, whatever it is. But when there's a mismatch between how much needs to get done and the amount of resource that you have to get that done, the
Mm-hmm.
more that that's out of whack, the more likely you're going to be experiencing those feelings of burnout as you're experiencing that for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can all relate in today's educational world. Our proverbial plates are full. And whether it's the federal government, state governments, local affiliations, or even our districts, the amount of pressure that we're putting on educators to get everything accomplished, it's a lot. And it doesn't seem to be going anywhere right now. So getting more in line with the job and the demands, getting those more in line as far as the resources to meet those various demands, the better off we're going to be. So we have to continue to
Mm-hmm.
look
Mm-hmm.
at that. A second mismatch is a lack of control or autonomy. Are educators tasked, do they feel as though they have decision making power or autonomy in their jobs? Are they being trusted to make good decisions? Are they being
Mm-hmm.
trusted to do good work? Or are they being micromanaged? And if you're being micromanaged for long periods of time consistently, that wears on a person definitely can contribute to burnout. The third area, what Maslow and Leiter would say is reward, which I call in the book ERA. So encouragement,
Mm-hmm.
recognition, appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
We can't have enough of it, quite honestly. The more encouragement, recognition, appreciation that we have for the work that we do, the greater the likelihood of our engagement levels. And too many times you have people just showing up at their jobs feeling as though they're anonymous, that they don't
Mm-hmm.
matter, that what they say doesn't matter, what they do doesn't matter. They don't feel as though they're seen, heard, or respected, and that's a real thing. So that would be a third mismatch. A fourth would be a breakdown of community or a
Mm-hmm.
lack of positive relationships, just not feeling like there's collaboration, not feeling that there's meaningful relationships with various colleagues in the work environment, in the school setting. And then the fifth mismatch would be fairness, that decisions are being made and you feel that though they're not fair, whether that's someone's being promoted or there's something where someone is given something and there's not a fair process involved, whether that's a hiring decision, a personnel decision, whatever that happens to be. When there's a lack of fairness for an extended period of time consistently, that can contribute to those feelings of burnout. And then
Mm-hmm.
the sixth and final one is values. So my values as an individual, are they in line with the values of my organization, my school, or my district? For example, maybe as an individual, I value integrity. What I
Mm-hmm.
say and do, I want those things to match up and to align. But maybe my district doesn't really value integrity, or they're dishonest with some different situations or whatnot, or they're not revealing the truth. Well, when there's a clash between the individual and the work environment in terms of values, that's not going to be good. You're not going to have a strong fit. So
Mm-hmm.
all of those things are going to contribute uh, over extended periods of time to those feelings of burnout. So
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that gives you a little idea of kind of the research base and what I was looking to do within the book. I lay out the problem and
Mm-hmm.
then I start tackling, okay, that's great, but we don't want to just admire this problem. What could we do about it? What can we do about it in our schools?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and also looking at the organizational level, whether it be a building, a district, or even a larger community. And as you said, it's not just applying to educators. I mean, I think it helps somebody narrow down like many of the reasons for burnout. It's not just overwork, right? It's insufficient rewards. It's the lack of community. I mean, there's several reasons. So yes, I think that would be a great read for people who want to learn more about just the burnout and just the positive psychology involved in moving forward from that. But in your practice, since you did your research for your dissertation and completed that last fall, and then now you've had this difficult year where you're in the trenches so much, is there anything from the book that kind of has changed your thinking or since you've gone through this difficult year, anything that's changed your practice in the past year?
Yeah, and I think it's been just these areas, these six
Mm-hmm.
mismatches, as being very in tune
Mm-hmm.
with, are there things that I'm doing as a leader that are contributing to these things, and being very mindful about
Mm-hmm.
the workload for sure of our
Mm-hmm.
people. And as I mentioned, our teachers for the better part of the year were doing two jobs. They were
Mm-hmm.
teaching in person, face to face students, but then also they were preparing virtual content for our students learning at home. And that's not just the teachers in the Western Dubuque School District, that's all over the country. People were doing
Mm-hmm.
that. And as I looked at, okay, things that I learned from the book, yes, we really need to monitor what our teachers are doing as far as their workload. We need to give them a little bit of grace and a little bit of break. And if there's things that we can take off of their plates, gosh, we really need to do that, because there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
There's only so many hours in the day, and that is a finite resource. So what could we do as district leaders, as building leaders, to monitor that workload, to make sure that when there's opportunity, can we take something off of the plates of our educators to be able to give their best to kids? Then I also think about, like, control and autonomy. Am I giving our people enough decision-making authority? Am I? And oftentimes, what do we want? We want choice and we want voice. We want to make sure that our voices are heard with different plans. And I can't tell you how many times that we had to pivot this year with different directives that were coming or different changes or whatever. But one way that we were successful within our school and within our district is we pulled our people together so often, and we just asked, okay, so here's what we're tasked with. What are we going to do about this? What do we want this to look like? How can we help each other, et cetera? And by giving teachers and educators voice, it just empowers them to make decisions that are going to be best. And really, who's the expert in the building? It's our teachers. They know our students. They know what their needs are. And a lot of times they just need the permission to be able to go out and do it. So providing that control and autonomy was really big, but really, like I said, it was just oftentimes asking. And then, of course, encouragement, recognition, appreciation. This year, I was very cognizant about making sure that when I saw something, I said something, whether that was through an individual note card that I might write a little note to a teacher or to a paraprofessional or a secretary about doing a great job. If it's specific, genuine, heartfelt, and timely, you really can't go wrong. Maybe it was taking the time to send out a nice email to a group of people working on a specific project, or stopping by someone's classroom and just giving them some face-to-face contact and saying, listen, thanks for what you're doing. I know you're working hard. You're busting your tail to make things work this year. So thanks for everything that you do. Just being cognizant of providing more of that encouragement in a variety of ways. And then, with those things of just that builds the relationship, that builds the sense of community within the building as well.
And I can, really tell when you're in a teacher's classroom and they have those notes of encouragement, or, just those kudos, they'll put that on the bulletin board behind their desks, right? I mean, those are things that they keep for years. So just a little note goes a long way.
Absolutely. And I knew that when I get in the practice of usually once per day, I'm at least writing one note card per day. Start my day that way, writing it to someone within our building for something specific that they did to give them a little bit of boost. It makes me feel better, and I know it makes them feel better. I knew by doing that practice that there was having some type of an impact, is that when I would walk around, I would see them posted in prominent locations, whether that was at their desk or on their bulletin board behind their desk or whatever. I knew that those cards were having some type of an impact because they were displaying them.
We talked a little bit when I read the bio about some of the coaching experience you have. So tell me about kind of how you took tools from your coaching toolbox in terms of classroom management, and how you use that as a teacher, and then when you entered administration, how that helped you.
Yeah, so the better part of my teaching career, I've had the opportunity to coach baseball and football within our district, and I've just learned so many lessons from the athletic field that will apply to leadership, they apply to classroom management, and so forth. And when I think about the athletic fields, whether that's a baseball field, a football field, or whatever that happens to be, it's just one big classroom, really. Where the same concepts apply. We're trying to teach great character to kids. We're trying to teach them to be responsible. We're trying to teach them to work hard, etc. But one thing in terms of classroom management that I learned with football in particular, there are so many moving parts in a football team, and you've got, roughly 50 kids on a team. That's a lot to manage, and there's different position groups and all those kinds of things. But one thing that I learned is the ability to time manage and how that turned over into the classroom. So there's only so many hours that you have of football practice in a day, and that's kind of regulated. So you've got to make the most of every minute that you have. So planning ahead of time is how you want each different segment to go was critical, and designing and delegating responsibilities. If you got 6 coaches on your team, coach 1 needs to do this, coach 2, coach 3, coach 4, and being very detail oriented about who's doing what and when and what the objectives are in that particular segment. Now, turning that over to the classroom, it goes the same way. You might have a paraprofessional in your classroom where you're the teacher. Okay, what's the teacher doing this time? What's the paraprofessional doing this time? What are the other kids, if they are somewhat on their own, what are they doing at this time? And what are those objectives? What do we want to get done? And then designing the environment to fit that. So from a football practice standpoint, there was so much carryover and transfer that I learned of how that can impact classroom management. They're one and the same. It's just a smaller version of the classroom in the actual classroom than the football field. So really, really great lessons that I have learned from the athletic arena to apply into the classroom and for building management, for that matter, as a building principal.
Yeah, definitely. You can, those are skills that transfer over, and, people who have a lot of coaching experience seem to, kind of that they fit right into those roles where, if there are difficult situations, right, you're able to manage them, or, unexpected, right, you're able to manage those unexpected situations a little easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your involvement in the Iowa Education Chat, and what that entailed, and kind of what was discussed, and kind of where you go now from there.
Yeah, so Iowa Ed Chat was a big thing. We recently kind of hit the pause button and stopped doing that over the last year, but the 6 years prior, I had the opportunity to host this Twitter chat on Sunday evenings with Nick Duffy and Andrea Townsley, two Iowa educators as well. And at 8 o'clock Central on Sunday nights, we facilitated a conversation centered around 7 questions related to the latest trends in education, whether that was one-to-one initiatives, whether that was project-based learning, general leadership, digital leadership, whatever that happened to be, whatever was on our mind or we felt was somewhat of a hot topic, we structured 7 questions in a Twitter chat format and really built the engagement of educators in Iowa and people outside of Iowa to jump on Twitter and have a conversation related to those different topics. Many times we had a number of experts within that field jump in, and I think of like project-based learning. So I think of Aaron Murphy and Ross Cooper, two of the really leaders in that area of leader practitioners in the area of project-based learning. They would engage with us in certain weeks of those conversations. Something else that was built off of that is once per month, we would do a live video show where we would bring on a guest, whether that was Jim Knight or whether that was Todd Whitaker, whether that was Peter DeWitt, potentially Jimmy Casas or Jeff Zoll, leaders within the field, Eric Scheniger or Tom Murray. And we'd ask them questions in a live broadcast format through YouTube of their areas of expertise and engage our audience with that, all while having a back channel conversation going on the Twitter hashtag as well. So it was really a pretty cool opportunity for us. And doing that for 6 years was wonderful to really engage different educators in the state and beyond. But it got to a point where we needed a little bit of a break. Andrea, Nick, and I did. And then the big derecho storm hit the Cedar Rapids area where Nick and Andrea are close to residing, and they were impacted by that personally and professionally. So we really hit the pause button and really haven't come back yet. Now, to say we may in the future, but at this point, we've just kind of stopped with that. And but in the past, when we did the Iowa Ed Chat, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys had a big network of people following that, and because there's it's easy to get connected, it's easy to host YouTube chats, Twitter chats, and things like that, so you can always pick something back up when the time's right. So
yeah, definitely
I wanted to talk to you about some of your professional speaking, and maybe what do you speak about at breakouts. You said you've spoken at NASP, and some of the research maybe from your dissertation that came out in some of those breakout sessions.
Absolutely. So yeah, I've been fortunate enough to speak at in NEESP a number of times, a number of local and
Mm-hmm.
regional conferences as well. And really, what I like to talk about and what I like to present about, number one, is digital leadership, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a passion of mine of how to communicate a message that is authentic and engages people within your face-to-face environment, but then
Mm-hmm.
beyond that as well, whether that's your school community or within the state, whatever that happens to be. But what are those digital tools and how can they work for you to make your life a little bit easier? And
Mm-hmm.
that's a passion of mine, of just looking at whether it's social media tools or other tools in a digital format to build your leadership. That's an area that definitely is a passion of mine. But then also, really the information that I wrote about in Permission to Be Great in the book, as
Mm-hmm.
far as, okay, so these are the 6 mismatches between worker and work environment. We know that when these things are out of whack, the greater the likelihood of job burnout. We know when
Mm-hmm.
these are in line, when we're more matched with these areas, that the likelihood of engagement is that much higher. So I talk about, okay, that's the problem, but what can we do about those things? How
Mm-hmm.
in your space could you increase encouragement, recognition, appreciation? This is what's worked for me. What's worked for you? How
Mm-hmm.
could you build a sense of community? How could you enhance positive relationships within your space? Having
Mm-hmm.
one-to-one individual conversations with every staff member on a quarterly basis, that's something that's helped me tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's not realistic within your space, but what is? What could you do to build those relationships, build that sense of community? I
Mm-hmm.
talk about how to connect individual values with organizational core values. And do you have them? First off, what do
Mm-hmm.
you stand for? What do you believe in? And what do you hold dear? Now, I talk through a process of what we've done, what I've done personally, and what we've done within our organization. But does that work for you? Or is there something different that you could do to get those values in line? So that is definitely a passion area that I've spoken on quite often over the years. And within the last year, I've put that together in a book that kind of serves as somewhat of a playbook of, this is what's worked for me. And these are some ideas to get you thinking about how to get more in line with
Mm-hmm.
educator and the work environment to really increase engagement
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in your setting, because we know this as well. The more engaged our teachers and our educators are, the better the outcomes for students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've seen just from your bio that you've been mostly in the same district, correct?
I have. Yep. This is my just finished up my 18th year in Western Dubuque schools, and I've fulfilled just about every role under the sun, from
Mm-hmm.
teacher to coach to administrator to teacher on special assignment, all kinds of different roles that I've held.
So when you've talked about those organizational values, right? When you're with an organization for so long and there's all these, especially last year with all those changes, right, that took place and just how, organizational structures shift sometimes, there's leadership changes at the top and, just different demographic changes, things like that. I think that's a key point when you're talking about that, especially those, I would say, long haulers in an organization to really look at your values and how they align with the organization. So that's interesting.
Most definitely. And I think you bring up a really good point
Mm-hmm.
there, is like when you're really clear
Mm-hmm.
what with about what you stand for, what you believe in, what you hold dear, what's at your core. When
Mm-hmm.
times get tough, you can rely on that, and you can
Mm-hmm.
make it makes those decisions not necessarily easy, but a lot
Mm-hmm.
easier to make when you know that you're acting within your values and
Mm-hmm.
within your organizational values, that you know, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in, so we're going to make a decision that fits this value. Gosh, there was no shortage of tough decisions in this pandemic, but when you're really clear with what you stand for and your values, boy, it makes it a lot easier, so you can weather that storm a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. 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 Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you today on the Out of the Trenches podcast. Out of everything we've talked about today, what's one thing in particular you'd like listeners to remember?
I'd like listeners to remember to really take this conversation seriously as far as
Mhm.
what we're talking about with the mismatches between the individual and the work environment, and like what you can do to increase engagement in your setting, because
Mhm.
it is the difference maker in my opinion. There are so many different strategies and tools and curricula out there to quote fix all of that's wrong in education. And there's so
Mhm.
much right with in education. I think so many times we overthink it.
Mhm.
And just how can we address workload? How can we build more control and autonomy? How can we encourage, recognize, and appreciate a little bit more? Establish relationships, a sense of
Mhm.
community, making fair, just decisions that are in line with our values. That's what I want listeners to remember is like that is not it's not easy to do, but it's not complicated either.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
consistent practice over time to make that place just a little bit better and increase the engagement of the educators that you work with and that you serve.
Mhm. Mhm. That's so important to remember. And, the better the engagement is, the better the culture is, and that trickles down to the students. So,
Absolutely.
where can people connect with you and find you online?
Yeah, so you can find all my stuff at danpbutler.com is probably best to head to my website. From there, you can access my email, you can access my Twitter handle, Instagram, Facebook, all that. But pretty much online, I'm Dan P. Butler on Twitter, Instagram, and then danpbutler.com.
Great. Well, it was a pleasure having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.